I mean, can people really read diverse books outside of cultural months? It's a radical concept, but who knows? The month of May is coming soon, which means that it is time for the annual Asian Readathon. If you're new to this channel, the Asian Readathon is a month-long reading marathon that I started a couple of years ago just for fun. The whole purpose is to read more books written by Asian authors and or featuring Asian characters. This is an online event and is meant to be super easy and accessible to everyone, so you can join from anywhere. You can do it on your own, or you can join a book club, or you can document your reading list journey on the internet, like use the hashtag Asian Readathon on Twitter, YouTube, whatever. And it's how a lot of people discover books and authors that they normally wouldn't have gone into before, because I've also built out a giant list of Asian books by Asian authors. And what better way to explore audiobooks than with today's sponsor, Audible. Half of the stories that I consume throughout the year are audiobooks, especially when it comes to thriller titles. So what's great about Audible is that not only do they have a growing selection of audiobooks and podcasts that you can download, but they also have a really vast thriller and mystery section. So for example, an Audible original that came out in March last month, it's one that's called Desperate Deadly Widows. This one is written by 4 authors who wrote 4 characters, has 4 different narrators voicing each part. New members can try Audible for free using my link audible.com/withcindy or by texting withcindy to 500-500. So thanks to Audible for sponsoring, and now let's get back to the video. I also like the idea of giving a theme for every year too. So this year's theme is gonna be loosely based on the movie Past Lives. This was a romantic drama film that came out last year. It follows 2 childhood friends over the course of 24 years, and they contemplate about the nature of their relationship as their lives start to grow apart and they live very different paths from one another. And when this movie came out, it had so many of my friends in a chokehold. Literally everybody told me that they cried watching this movie. I feel like I was the odd one out because I didn't cry while watching it. However, I will still acknowledge the impact that it had upon people, especially when it was nominated for an Academy Award. That's a pretty big deal because it's extremely rare for a film directed by an Asian director and starring Asian actors to be nominated for such a big award like that. I'll go ahead and tell you the prompts. Basically, there are 5 challenges. The first one is always a freebie, and that is to read a book written by any Asian author. Again, super simple and easy. And then for prompt number 2, this is to read a book that feels timeless. I was inspired by this by a quote from a Collider article that talked about the movie, saying that this is a story that could only exist because of modern circumstances, but feels timeless in its approach. And again, all these challenges are meant to be very easy and up to interpretation. So a book that feels timeless could mean anything. Like maybe it's a book that spans across decades. Maybe it's an older book that's still relevant today. Maybe it's a book that you've read before, but you want to read it again. Maybe it's a new book that came out, but you feel like it's going to be a classic. Maybe it's a book that takes place in the past or takes place in the future, but the themes of it feel so timeless and applicable to any time period. I don't know. You can figure it out on your own. The third challenge is to read an underrated book. And this is because obviously Past Lives didn't win the Academy Awards, but it still has such an impact. So when I say underrated, that really could mean anything. Maybe it's a book that has lower ratings. Maybe it's a book that not enough people talk about. Maybe it wasn't a bestseller. Maybe the author isn't super famous or you hadn't heard about this book before. The fourth challenge is to read a debut book by an Asian author. And this is because the director of Past Lives is Celine Song, and this was her first feature directorial debut. So when you pick a book, regardless of whether this author has been out in the industry for a couple years, this should be the author's first book. But if you really want to play it loosey-goosey with this, you could even read a book that maybe technically isn't a debut, but it's your first time reading from this author. Again, totally up to you how strict you want to be with these prompts. The last challenge is something that is a little bit more abstract, and that is to read a book with a story or character that represents what you would want in your next life. And this is in reference to a conversation in the movie where one of the characters asks what their relationship will be in their next life. And this specific moment in the movie when they talk about, this future life is supposed to be very heart-wrenching because their whole relationship is about what could have been. And obviously, their paths have strayed, but maybe in the next life they could have been together. So this is where all the girlies were crying over it. So how I've interpreted this prompt is if there's a book out there that has some facet of what you would want to experience in your next life, you should go ahead and read it. And maybe this is like a character with with a job you want, or they live in a world or a country that you would want to experience, or they have a romantic relationship that you would want to have, or maybe they have personality traits that you would want to have. Like the loosest interpretation that I can think of for this prompt is like you could literally pick up a nonfiction memoir and it could be the most gut-wrenching memoir ever of a bunch of tragedies, but you could think, wow, in my next life, I would want to be as brave as the author that's being featured in this book. Any of these 5 challenges can be combined to make it easier. So theoretically, you could read one book, and if it applies to all 5 challenges, you technically have completed the Asian Readathon. Of course, there are people who really want to go all in on this and they want to read a separate book for each prompt. That is totally up to you, whatever works for your schedule and your time and energy. Also, any book counts, so it could be poetry, manga, graphic novels, audiobooks, all of that is fair game. The only twist that I have is that although you can combine challenges and read the books in any order, you should make sure that each of the book that you read should feature a character or author of a different Asian ethnicity. And this is to encourage cultural diversity. So for example, if I were to try to read 2 books for Asian Readathon, theoretically, I could read a book by a Japanese author to combine the first 3 challenges. But if I read a second book by a Japanese author, that would not count towards any other challenge. I would have to read another author or character from a different ethnicity to cover the 4th and 5th challenge. Now, if you're wondering, what are all the Asian ethnicities out there? What counts as Asian? How I have interpreted it is basically just from Google. Like I Google list of Asian ethnicities or list of Asian countries, and I kind of just follow it from there. And you'll see from these lists that it's very broad. And I'll paste a screenshot here so you can see the list as well. And if you're wondering where you can even start with book recommendations or different ethnicities that you haven't typically read before, this is where the directory of Asian books comes in handy. I have built out an Asian Readathon page on Storygraph. It's a really easy way for people to add book recommendations based on the author's ethnicity, reading prompts, whatever. I love it because now I don't have to add all these books manually. It can really be a community effort. If you don't have any books to add, I believe you can still access all of the lists even if you don't have an account. So that works out for you. But if you would like to add books to it, I did show a very easy walkthrough on how to do that. So I will insert the clip that I filmed. So here's an example of me looking up a book to add to the Asian Readathon. I just click on Add to Reading Challenges, and I click on 2024 Asian Readathon Challenges. I check mark the applicable prompts, and then also as a bonus, if you have joined the directory of Asian books, you can type the ethnicity of the author, and in this case, Palestinian, and you can add it to the directory as well. Assuming you have joined the reading challenges on Storygraph, you can find them under the reading challenges tab, and from there you can see whatever books you added along with other books that other people have added. I also have a Google Doc that I will link in my description that will have the link to the Storygraph. It'll have free resources that you can turn to for books if money is an issue. This includes library resources, free trials to reading platforms, Spotify links for free books. I will also have lists for different Asian book recommendations across different websites. So you really have tons of resources at the tip of your fingers because I did all that job for you. Yeah, that's right. Another woman of color doing mental labor for you. Typical. You're welcome. On the Google Doc, I will also have a list of read-alongs and book clubs that people are doing during the month of May. That way, if you don't want to read by yourself and you want to join a book club or watch a live show of other people discussing the books or join a Discord and talk about the books with other people, I will have that list for you. And that is really going to be dependent on people DMing me on Asian Readathon on Twitter and letting me know about their book club, and I will update the doc and put your info in there. So be sure to let me know. If you are posting anything about Asian Readathon online, I would also encourage you to use the hashtag Asian Readathon on Instagram, on Twitter, on YouTube. I'm going to try to put together a playlist of videos for this year as well. So I will every now and then search up Asian Readathon videos for this year and add it to a playlist. And that way it'll be nice for us to see, you know, a bunch of people participating in this from all over the world. You can also follow Asian Readathon on Twitter, where I will be retweeting pretty much whatever people post about Asian Readathon, as well as books that are coming out by Asian authors. So I think that pretty much covers all the information for this year. If I turn out to be missing anything else, again, you will have all the information in the Google Doc that I put together. together. The last thing that I want to cover for this video is a suggestion of books that would apply to each prompt. I just want to use this opportunity to shout out books by Asian authors that will be released this year or have recently been released. So if you want suggestions from me personally, I got you. However, I didn't want to talk about the same books by Asian authors that I've loved over and over again. So this time I wanted to focus on books that I have not talked about on my channel yet and that I have not read yet. And I actually don't know yet if I will be reading these for Asian Readathon because, for example, like the first book that I'm gonna talk about, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna end up reading it in April instead of May, so it's not even gonna apply, but I'm just gonna toss it out there for you to check out if you want to, because I haven't talked about these on my channel yet. So the first prompt is a freebie, and a book that has been on my radar for a while is A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faisal, and this is an American Muslim of Sri Lankan and Arab descent, and this just looks like a really fun YA fantasy. Basically, the girlie on the cover is a criminal mastermind who owns a place that by day is a very prestigious tea room, and by night it turns into an illegal blood house that caters to vampires. One day her establishment gets threatened, so she is forced to strike a deal in order to save it. And that also means calling together a lot of the city's outcasts that are very skilled in specific things, because this is a heist fantasy, bitch. Also, not everyone that's in her crew might be on her side. Like, we might have some sneaky bitches up in here. So I am looking forward to what kind of shenanigans this heist group gets into, and that's why I think I might just end up reading it before Asian Readathon. The second challenge is to read a book that feels timeless, and for this I am gonna go with a book that actually isn't gonna be out by the time it's May, and it is called Sorry for the Inconvenience, which is my same sentiment for telling you about this book and you can't even read it for Asian Readathon. I discovered about this book from actually seeing the author's TikToks when she was telling about her story, and this is a memoir that's coming out on July 2024. The author is Farah Nazrishi. She's a Pakistani American, and I was so captivated by her story because she originally wasn't an author. She was just someone who was telling the story about how she met her husband. They were originally classmates in college and they were paired together for a project. They eventually became friends, and this spanned over 13 years, and she ends up dealing with a tragic family loss where basically her whole family passed away, and she was also dealing with a lot of health issues and getting really sick. This guy, who again is just her friend at the time, he proposes a marriage at convenience because if they were to get married, then she can get access to his healthcare benefits. And as they go through this pretend marriage, she realizes that she's actually genuinely falling for him, and turns out that he has also been in love with her the entire time, but at the same time he was fine with offering all of these things for her even if it wasn't reciprocated, because he just cared for her that deeply. And it was such a sweet story, and the reason why I would apply this to the prompts is because it takes place over 13 years, and you know I love a good friends to lovers story, especially if that relationship spans over like a decade. Sorry that this book could not apply to you for Asian Readathon, but I just had to shout out this book. Another book that I want to shout out, and this one is actually coming out in May. This is going to be for the third prompt, which is an underrated book, and that is Spin of Fate by A.A. Vora, who is an Indian-Japanese author living in Tokyo, and that's going to be relevant to why I think it's underrated. So basically this book is pitched as Avatar meets Naruto, and it's a high fantasy debut. It has a scientific hard magic system that's also loosely inspired by the law of karma. So this takes place in a world that's governed by tyrannic law, which is basically this ancient magical force that segregates people into upper and lower realms based on their morality. This is basically what Twitter wishes they could be. How it works is that basically people in the lower realm who are more sinful, if they commit themselves to kindness, then their souls will lighten and it will allow them into the upper realms. The main character is one of the few lowers who actually got to ascend into the higher realm, but she wants to go back to reunite with her mom, who's trapped down there. So as a result, she joins a group of rebels called the Balancers, and they believe in helping people who have been condemned to a life of suffering. Like, they don't believe that this law or this rule should be a thing. The premise of this sounds super interesting, and I already have a couple ideas for why this kind of world where like you're segregating people by their morality is problematic, and I'm very curious if the author has similar ideas to like what I'm thinking of, or if they're gonna surprise me and show other things that I hadn't considered before. I think it's underrated is because I haven't heard anything about it. Like, I haven't seen people talk about it. Usually if a book is coming out, you would see that like the author is doing book tours, but I think the reason why there hasn't been like a tour going on is because the author lives in Japan. So I think it's really hard for non-American authors to be under the spotlight as much as like American authors that are obviously usually at the forefront of publishing. This definitely seems like a very underrated book that needs more attention. The 4 challenges to read a debut book, and for this one, I might check out Natural Beauty by Ling Huang, and this came out in 2023. This is about a young musician who is extremely skilled at the piano, and she had all these dreams to be essentially like a prodigy musician, but she has to give it up because some tragedy happens. It's some kind of accident that leaves her parents debilitated, and so she basically has to abandon her dreams for a job at this high-end beauty and wellness store in New York City. The book becomes more about how she gets absorbed into this beauty-obsessed world. There's all these products about slimming your thighs or smoothing your skin or lightening your hair or lightening your skin too. It definitely sounds like commentary on the consumerism and beauty standards that people have, and I'm curious if it's gonna go specifically into Asian beauty standards, because the thing about Asia, like especially for East Asians, their skincare is on lock. They are known for having great skincare products, but they're also known for having very rigid beauty standards to the point where it's a big problem if you are not conventionally attractive. So I'm curious to see if there are any ties to like cultural identity here and ties to specifically the consumerism of Asian beauty supplies and skincare supplies. And for the final prompt being a book that has a world or character representing what I would want in my next life, I'm gonna go with Dragon Fruit by Makia Lucier. This is a romantic fantasy inspired by Pacific Island mythology. This is pretty much gonna be my loosest interpretation of this prompt because in actuality, I don't know much about Hawaii other than the fact that I should not travel there because the natives are having a rough time with all the tourism. But I will say the food is so fucking good. I love poke bowls, I love spam musubi. That's basically my sole motivation for like wanting to experience the world of the main character in my next life. Like aside from all the fantasy stuff, it's not even about that. It's about the bomb ass food that she gets to eat. So this book is about a daughter of an old island family who becomes an exile because her father stole a sea dragon egg that's meant to heal a princess. And there's all this lore about the sea dragon egg because it's supposed to have these magical capabilities that would undo a person's greatest sorrow. So she's been forced into exile, but a couple years later, she encounters a dragon who offers her a chance to return home and to fix the terrible thing that her father did. I have not really gotten a chance to read that many books that are by Hawaiian authors and are based in Hawaii. And I don't really know much about Pacific Island mythology either. So it just seems like something very new and refreshing that we haven't seen before in mainstream fantasy. And that pretty much summarizes some of the Asian books that are on my radar right now. I don't know which ones I'll be reading for Asian Readathon yet, but I do hope that by me sharing some of this, maybe that will inspire you to check it out in the month of May or even after May too. I mean, can people really read diverse books outside of cultural months? It's a radical concept, but who knows? If you are participating, I would love to know what books you plan on reading for Asian Readathon, because that will also help me figure out what books I'll be reading as well. Until then, I will see you next time. Goodbye.